Today I wanted to talk about specific questions I was asked based on my ERAS application during the residency interview season. I'm not going to be talking about questions that everybody gets asked, but mostly just personalized specific questions I was asked. The reason why I wanted to talk about this is that it might be able to help you identify areas where you could expect questions. As a bit of a background, my name's Alyssa. I'm a fourth year medical student. I just matched into anesthesia in the 2024 match cycle. I'm starting residency next month, which is super exciting. For those of you who have been listening for a while, you might notice I'm under a loft bed right now because we downsized. So I have my desk down here, and then Tony has his desk over there, and we are living more of a tight, confined life right now. My father-in-law built this for us, and he also built us these steps that have super great storage in them. So this way, hopefully we might be able to buy a home next year, depending on what the interest rates look like. We'll see how long we might be living the loft bed life. Anyway, that's besides the point, but this might be the location that I might be filming in for now. So let's go ahead and get right into it. I'm going to go through each of the sections of the ERAS application and talk about some of the things that I was asked, and yeah, hopefully it's helpful for you. Starting off with the geographic preferences, I chose 3 preferences and wrote a little blurb in each of those sections about why I want to live in that area. I focused on friends and family, basically social support that we have in those areas, and I was asked a surprising amount of questions during my interviews about why I want to live in this location and about our friends and family that we have in the area. I think they're trying to really know about how serious you are about living there and the type of social support you would have, because residency is really stressful. So I was just asked a lot of questions about location and why do you want to live in Michigan, or why do you want to live in Ohio or Washington? You know what I mean? I just got a lot of questions like that. The next section is awards and memberships. I wasn't asked anything, but I also didn't do anything super impressive there. Then we have the experiences section. In the experiences section, you can write about 10 experiences that you've had. This can be before medical school. You can write, or during medical school, you can write about anything. So I wrote about my work experiences that I've had, the internships I've had in the past, research, volunteer, and hobbies. And I was asked a ton of questions from this section specifically. One of the questions that really got me off guard, though, was if you didn't want me to miss anything on your application, what would you want me to know? Or what do you want me to go away with? In some ways, it sort of made me feel like they didn't read my application. It was like they wanted me to give them the main takeaway, which is totally fine. But also, I wasn't expecting it, because I thought I would be going into this interview, or the interviews, with them having known my application. I thought that was why they wanted to interview me. But anyway, that was one of the questions that I was asked. So being able to pick your most important experience and explain, why they should take that away with them, why they would go to the board and advocate for you. They also asked me what is my most impactful volunteer experience. So they, wanted to know that. They asked me a lot about hobbies. So in my hobby section, I wrote about playing the violin. It's just something important to me that I love, and they brought that up a lot. And yeah, they were just really curious about it. And, in the interview trail, it can get really stressful sometimes. And I cannot explain to you the amount of times that I have said stupid things during my interviews. But there was one interview specifically where they're like, oh, what's your favorite piece for the violin? Mind went blank. It's the Bach Chaconne. I love anything by Bach. So I couldn't remember. I was like, I really love anything by Bach. And they're like, oh, okay. And I was like, I'm not remembering the exact name of the piece. And I was just mind blanking. And knowing me, I couldn't just say something else, some other piece that I knew, because it had to be my favorite, And so I just sat there trying to think of the name of it, and I just couldn't. And they're like, oh, what key is it in? And I was like, I don't know what key it's in. I don't remember. Yeah, anyway, sometimes the questions can get really weird. I think maybe they were trying to suss me out. Does she actually play the violin? And honestly, I started wondering if I even played the violin at that question. I was like, oh. So anyway, they can go really in depth in some of those things. But I think specifically the hobbies are just really easy to talk about. They also asked me about the experiences where I was living abroad. So I studied abroad, working on an engineering project, and then I also lived abroad working for a bit. and they wanted to know about those experiences. Those are just really easy things to pick off. Like shocking things, I think, are sort of easy to pick off. Like, oh, did this person live out of the country or out of the state for a while? Or like, did they do something really unique? Those are the things that they want to talk about. Or just like the easy things. If you wrote about running, for instance, that's maybe something easy that they can connect with. Maybe they're a runner too. They'd ask you about that. I did not write about running, but my roommate did, and she was asked questions about that. The next section was impactful experiences. So there's this option to write about something that might have happened to you or something significant that happened in your life during medical school. And my dad actually passed away during medical school unexpectedly. So I wrote about that because it did shape my approach to medicine. What I wasn't expecting were some of the questions based on this section. So I did receive condolences by like 50 to 60% of people, which is fine. Like I expected people to probably acknowledge it. It's okay if they don't. Like I don't care. It's just something that happened to me that was significant, and it also shows that I can get through hard things and still, persevere. Somebody asked me, how did my dad die? And I wasn't prepared for that kind of a question. I thought that was a very intimate question to be asking. I mean, I'm definitely an open book, but I thought that crossed some boundaries there. So if you are writing about the impactful experience, don't shy away from it. Like, definitely do it, but just be aware that some people might not be sensitive in the questions that they're asking, and they might ask something like that. Okay, next, I just wanted to briefly talk about signaling. I could make a different video on this. In anesthesia, you could have 5 gold signals and 10 silver signals. The majority of my interviews came from my signals and my geographic preferences when they aligned with one another. So if I had a geographic preference and a signal together, that was more likely to get me an interview. I didn't get any interviews in the places that I didn't geographic signal. I only got 2 interviews at places that I didn't signal. Anyway, I just wanted to briefly tell you about that, but I could make a different video about that as far as like results. Okay, the next section was hometowns and address. This was something that I didn't expect to ever come up. So they have the option, I think, of like 6 hometowns, maybe it's 5. And I put down places that I had internships in. When you've been living a certain place, like you meet people like during my internships, so that it became somewhat like a home away from home for me. But the questions were a little bit weird. So one of them was a place in Texas, and they asked me, so you're from this city? And I'm like, no, I'm not originally, but I did spend a good amount of time there. But I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding in terms of how they ask the questions. Maybe it was just me, but they might ask like, oh, you're from XYZ, even though you might not be from there necessarily. You just spent a lot of time there. So if you want to just like nix that, I'd say it doesn't really matter. I think your geographic preferences and signaling matter a lot more than the hometown section, and they will bring it up. And then also your address. So the address that I have in ARIS, it's super weird because I put my hometown address, which is in the Midwest, at my mom's address, because we were living in Airbnbs while I was doing like away rotations and auditions and sub-Is and whatnot. So we didn't have a lease or a home at the time. So that was my address. And they're like, oh, so are you in South Dakota? And I was just like, no. Funny story. I'm actually in XYZ place on a rotation. They look at this stuff. They look at your address, which I wasn't really expecting. I didn't think it mattered. I thought it more mattered like if they needed to send you something. It was just a little bit difficult because I didn't have an address anywhere. You will get questions about your hometowns and your address, potentially. I got a lot of them. Oh, for me specifically, so I had connections to a surgical subspecialty because my dad's company growing up made surgical instruments, and so I had a connection to the surgical subspecialty where I had done internships and met people. So I talked about these things because I did spend a lot of time doing this sort of work during my undergrad years. So I talked about that, and they definitely wanted to talk about this a lot, and I think it's because they were trying to suss out if I was a dual applicant. They're like, oh, is anesthesia the backup plan kind of thing? Because a lot of people do that. Anesthesia was not my backup plan. It was my primary, and I didn't dual apply, but I had to make that very clear on a lot of interviews. Like, I guess if you're going to be talking about other specialties, be prepared for like the the questions about finding out if you're dual applying or not. I guess I wasn't really expecting it because my application was so tailored towards anesthesia. Like, my other experiences were anesthesia related, my research was anesthesia related. Like, I just wasn't expecting that. But because I had a couple of experiences on my application, they did bring that up. Okay, and then personal statement. I did have a few comments about my personal statement, and because I talked about the violin, not only there, but also in my experiences section, they just wanted to know more about the violin and everything. So yeah, that's basically it as far as questions specifically from my application. I hope this can be helpful for you. It is a very, very, very stressful time doing interviews. I would do an interview and afterwards I would just second guess everything that I said. Oftentimes, my husband, who was working from home at the time, he could like hear my conversations and he'd be like, "You did really great on the first two interviews, but like on the last one, I don't know what happened." And I'm like, "I know, I would say it first, but then he was like, "Yeah, that third one wasn't quite as good, but like you did good on the other two." But anyway, like you just second guess everything, and there isn't a lot of affirming you and like reassuring you during this time. You just kind of feel alone. It's like you do the interview and then you just feel like it's over. Like, what else can you do? So it's a very stressful time. Just like try to take care of yourself. It's okay to just chill on the couch afterwards and just be a vegetable. Like, that's kind of what I had to do to get through the time. If you're watching this at this time, like, it's terrible, and like it genuinely is one of my least favorite parts of medical school. Just be reaffirmed that it is a difficult time, but hang in there, and I know you'll do great. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments section below. I'll try to answer them. And yeah, please leave a like and subscribe if you're interested in more content like this.